My name is Julianne, and tonight I am going to tell you the story of how a woman tried to erase my existence, only to realize she had handed me the exact chisel I needed to destroy hers. Before we dive into the dark reality of what happened the night my father died, do me a favor, drop a comment down below and let me know where in the world you are watching from tonight. I love reading your locations. And if you are new here or haven't done so yet, please take a second to hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell notification so you never miss another story. Now listen closely. My father was a titan in the real estate world, a man built on granite and pure ambition. But to me, he was just Dad, the man who taught me how to read a balance sheet before I was 10 and showed me that true power never needs to shout. When my mother passed away a decade ago, Dad shut down emotionally. He buried himself in work, becoming an unapproachable fortress. And then 4 years later, Victoria walked into his life. Victoria was 32, stunning, cold, and possessed the kind of predatory grace that made birds stop singing when she walked into a room. She married my father within 6 months. I saw right through her from the very first dinner. The sly glances at his watch, the way her eyes lingered on the art lining our estate walls, the subtle ways she tried to distance him from me. I didn't fight her. I didn't need to. I knew my father, and I knew the bond we shared, even if it was quiet. What Victoria didn't know was that my father wasn't blind either. He knew precisely who he had married. 6 months before his sudden, fatal heart attack, Dad sat me down in his private study, handed me a sealed leather folder, and placed his palm over mine. "Julianne," he had said, his voice lower than usual, "a fool plays all their cards at once. A master keeps the ace in another room." Inside that folder was a deed. A total, unassailable, irrevocable transfer of ownership for the Apex, a 52-story commercial glass skyscraper sitting on the premier block of downtown Manhattan, valued at over $400 million. Along with it was a private trust account in my name, holding $28 million in liquid cash, completely disconnected from his public estate. He had quietly stripped those two assets away from his personal holdings before Victoria could ever touch them. He asked me for one promise. If I pass, do not mention the $28 million. Do not mention the skyscraper. Let the vultures circle what they think is the body. Watch how they act when they think they have won. I kept my word. The night my father died in the hospital, the air in our family mansion was thick with fake grief and heavy, suffocating scent of expensive lilies. We had just returned from the medical center. My eyes were raw, my chest aching with a hollow grief that felt like a physical wound. I was sitting on the leather sofa in the library, holding a cold cup of tea, staring into the dead fireplace. Victoria walked in. She hadn't shed a single tear all evening. Her black silk dress was crisp, her hair immaculate, her face painted with a chilling composure. She stood over me, shadow falling across my lap, holding a stack of legal documents that her attorney had somehow managed to draft within hours of my father's declaration of death. "Get up, Julianne," she said, her voice smooth, devoid of even a tremor of empathy. I looked up slowly. "What?" "You heard me," she replied, folding her arms, her lips curled into a faint, cruel smile. "Your father's primary will leaves the residential properties and the management of his estate to me as his surviving spouse. This house is mine now. The cars are mine. The legacy is mine. I've already had the security team clear out your old room. Your bags are sitting by the iron gates at the end of the driveway." She was kicking me out. On the exact night my father's heart stopped. She thought she had stripped me of everything. She believed I was a broken, helpless girl who had just lost her protector and her inheritance in one swift blow. "Dad isn't even cold yet, Victoria," I said quietly, keeping my voice utterly devoid of tremble. "And he never will be again," she snapped, stepping closer, her eyes flashing with a triumph she had clearly suppressed for 4 long years. "You've lived under my roof long enough on his charity. You thought you were special because you carried his blood, but blood means nothing in court, darling. Paper does. You have no standing here, no title to this estate, and not a single dime coming to you from his personal accounts. I am ordering you out of my house right now. If you aren't past the gate in 10 minutes, I'm calling the police for trespassing." She stood there waiting for the tears. She was starving for them. She wanted me to beg, to scream, to throw a tantrum, to give her the satisfaction of watching me fall to my knees and plead for a place to sleep. I didn't blink. I didn't cry. Instead, I set my teacup down on the mahogany table with a soft, deliberate clink. I stood up slowly, smoothing the wrinkles out of my black skirt. I looked her dead in the eye, not with anger, but with a terrifying, absolute calm. "Sure," I said smoothly. Victoria paused, her triumphant smirk flickering for a fraction of a second. She hadn't expected compliance. I took a single step toward her, leaning in just close enough that she could smell the cold tea on my breath. "Enjoy the mansion, Victoria," I whispered, my voice dripping with icy certainty. "Because tomorrow morning, you are going to realize that you just inherited $60 million in corporate debt, while the building your entire company operates out of belongs entirely to me." The color drained from her face so fast it looked as if she had been struck. Her eyes went wide, her jaw slackening, the triumphant sneer completely vanishing into a mask of pure, frozen horror. Victoria's lips parted, but no sound came out. The effortless, polished composure she had worn like armor for 4 years completely shattered in a single breath. What are you talking about?" she stammered, her voice losing its crisp edge, dropping into a panicked pitch. "The company owns that building." "The corporate headquarters. The company leased that building from a private entity, Victoria," I interrupted, my tone as flat and unyielding as a marble headstone. "A private entity that my father transferred 100% of to my sole ownership 6 months ago. As of midnight, I am your landlord. And as for your beloved inherited estate, Dad leveraged his personal portfolio to fund his last 3 commercial developments, the ones that failed last quarter. You wanted his personal legacy so badly? It's all yours. Along with every scrap of toxic liabilities tied to it." I didn't wait for her response. I picked up my coat, stepped past her paralyzed form, and walked out of the library. My heels clicked rhythmically against the marble floor of the foyer, echoing off the high ceilings of the house I had grown up in. I didn't look back as I pushed open the grand double doors and stepped out into the crisp, rain-slicked night air. Down by the iron gates, 2 black designer suitcases were sitting on the wet pavement, just as she had ordered. Beside them stood the estate's head of security, a man named Thomas who had worked for my father for nearly 15 years. His head was bowed, his expression torn between deep shame and quiet fury. "Miss Julianne," Thomas said softly, his voice thick with emotion as he hurried to open the door of a sleek black sedan parked at the curb. "I am so terribly sorry." She gave direct orders. If we didn't put your things out, she threatened to fire the entire staff without severance. "Don't apologize, Thomas," I said, offering him a faint, reassuring smile as I slid into the leather back seat. "You were just following orders to protect your family. But do me a favor. Keep your phone near you tomorrow morning. By noon, you won't be working for her anymore." He looked at me, bewildered, but nodded silently before closing the door. As the car pulled away, I leaned my head against the cool glass window, watching the iron gates of my father's estate shrink into the distance. The grief was still there, a heavy stone sitting in the center of my chest. But resting right beside it was a cold, calculating clarity. Victoria thought she had pulled off the ultimate coup. She thought she had stripped the grieving daughter of her birthright and tossed her into the street. She had no idea that she had just walked straight into a trap my father and I had spent months quietly assembling. That night, I didn't check into a cheap hotel or weep into a pillow. I had the driver take me straight to the penthouse suite at the Grand Regency, a hotel where the private trust account my father set up had already secured a long-term lease in my name. The $28 million sitting in that account wasn't just safety money, it was liquidity. It was fuel. In the corporate world, cash is oxygen, and while Victoria was about to drown in paper assets and crushing debt, I was sitting on a mountain of pure, liquid power. At 6 a.m. the next morning, I was already awake, sitting at the glass desk in my suite with a steaming cup of black coffee. I dialed the direct line of my father's head legal counsel, a brilliant cutthroat attorney named Sarah who had been sworn to secrecy until the day of Dad's passing. "Julianne," Sarah answered on the second ring, her voice sharp and fully alert. "I saw the news of your father's passing last night. I'm so sorry for your loss." "Thank you, Sarah," I replied calmly. "It's time. Activate the provisions." "With pleasure," Sarah said, the sound of papers shuffling through the line. Victoria's legal team has already filed to probate the primary will. They think they're taking control of the entire corporate structure by default. They have no idea about the restructuring. "How bad is the corporate debt leverage on the residential side?" I asked. "Severe," Sarah chuckled grimly. Your father structured the personal estate to absorb the entirety of the regional holding liabilities. Victoria inherited a gold-plated anchor. She has less than 72 hours before the first loan servicing payment of $12 million is due. If she can't pay it, the creditors will file for default, and the corporate entity will face immediate liquidation. And where does she plan on getting $12 million on short notice? She assumes she can use the commercial skyscraper as collateral for an emergency bank loan, Sarah explained. She thinks the Apex is part of the corporate portfolio. I smiled into the silence of my hotel room. Let her apply for the loan, Sarah. Let her line up the bankers, the board members, and the press. Let her play the grieving, powerful widow taking the reins of the empire. And when do we hit her? Sarah asked. At the emergency board meeting she called for 10 o'clock this morning, I said, standing up and walking over to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. Far in the distance, the glass spire of the Apex caught the first rays of the morning sun, gleaming like a silver blade. I want you to draft an immediate eviction notice for the corporate headquarters. Effective today. On what grounds? Sarah asked, a wicked smirk evident in her voice. Unpaid rent, I replied softly. My father quietly suspended the building's lease payments 3 months ago. The lease agreement states that if rent falls 90 days in arrears, the owner has the right to immediately terminate the lease and lock the doors. She thinks she's walking into a throne room today. I'm going to make sure she walks into a courtroom. By 9:30 a.m., I was standing in the lobby of the Apex. I was wearing a tailored charcoal gray suit, my hair pulled back into a sleek low knot, and black sunglasses resting on the bridge of my nose. Beside me stood Sarah and a team of 4 uniformed private security officers. Upstairs on the 52nd floor, Victoria was gathering the board of directors, ready to declare herself the new chief executive of my father's empire. She was about to deliver her victory speech. I looked at my watch. 9:55 a.m. Let's go upstairs, Sarah, I said smoothly, stepping into the private executive elevator. It's time to collect the rent. The private elevator shot up to the 52nd floor in total silence, the floor numbers ticking upward like a countdown. When the doors slid open, the grand floor-to-ceiling glass doors of the executive boardroom were wide open. Inside, Victoria sat at the head of a mahogany conference table that stretched 20 feet long. Surrounding her were 12 of my father's senior board members, looking uncomfortable, uncertain, and distinctly exhausted. Victoria, however, looked radiant. She was holding a pen over a set of emergency authorization documents, mid-sentence as she addressed the room. And as the primary heir to his estate, I expect full cooperation from this board during this transition, she was saying, her voice brimming with arrogant authority. We will consolidate the assets, rebalance the portfolio, and where exactly do you plan to relocate your offices when you leave this building in an hour? My voice echoed sharply across the glass and marble of the top floor. Every single head in the room snapped toward the entryway. Victoria's pen froze midair. Her head whipped around, her eyes widening as she saw me step into the room, flanked by Sarah and 4 imposing, uniformed security officers. Julianne? Victoria gasped, her face twisting into a mix of outrage and confusion. How did you get up here? Security was instructed to keep you off the property. You have no business here. Actually, Victoria, I said, strolling casually into the room with my hands draped loosely in the pockets of my trousers. You are the one who has no business here. She slammed her pen onto the table and stood up, smoothing her dress. Don't play games with me, child. I let you off easy last night by simply kicking you out of the house. If you don't turn around and walk out right now, I will have the police drag you out in handcuffs for trespassing on corporate property. Sarah stepped forward, pulling a thick, ribbon-bound legal document from her leather briefcase and laying it flat on the mahogany table right in front of the board members. Mrs. Corporate Estate, Sarah said, her voice crisp and razor-sharp. You might want to check the deed on this property before you call anyone for trespassing. The Apex does not belong to your late husband's personal estate, nor does it belong to this corporation. 6 months ago, the building was legally transferred into an independent trust held solely by Julianne. A collective gasp rippled through the board members. 2 of the senior executives immediately grabbed the documents, frantically flipping through the land title registry seals and transfer certificates. This is ridiculous. Victoria shrieked, her voice cracking as panic began to seep through her immaculate facade. It's a fraud! It's an illegal conveyance! My lawyers will have this set aside by noon. Your lawyers won't even have time to file a motion, I replied smoothly, leaning both hands on the back of a leather chair. Because as of 9 a.m. this morning, Sarah filed a formal notice of lease default. My father intentionally halted this company's rent payments 3 months ago to trigger a default clause that only the landlord could enforce. You owe my private trust $4.2 million in back rent. And according to Section 14 of the commercial lease agreement, I paused, looking her dead in the eyes with a slow, devastating smile. Non-payment beyond 90 days gives the landlord the right to immediate, unannounced lockout and eviction of all corporate operations. Victoria stumbled backward a step, her thigh hitting the heavy mahogany chair behind her. She turned frantically to the board members. Is this true? Tell her she can't do this. We have 48 hours to clear $12 million in personal estate obligations. We need this building as leverage for the bank loan. There is no bank loan, Victoria, Sarah interjected calmly. No institution in the world will underwrite a loan against a property you don't own. And since you inherited the residential holding entity directly, you personally absorb its $60 million in toxic corporate liabilities. The bank served a foreclosure notice on the mansion an hour ago. Victoria's breath hitched. Her hand flew to her throat, her face draining of every last drop of color until she looked like a phantom standing in the sunlight. The mansion. My house. It was never your house, I said softly, taking a step toward her. You spent 4 years calculating how to take everything my father built. You thought by isolating him, by whispering in his ear, and by throwing his daughter into the street the moment his breathing stopped, you would win the prize. But my dad played you from the very beginning. He let you sign the paperwork that tied every debt to your name, while he handed the true crown to me. I turned to the 4 security guards standing by the door. Escort her off the premises, I ordered quietly. She is not permitted to take anything other than her personal handbag. No files, no hard drives, no corporate property. If she resists, call the police and have her arrested for commercial trespass. You can't do this to me, Victoria screamed, her voice shrill and desperate as 2 security guards stepped up to her sides, firmly gripping her arms. I am his wife. I am the mistress of this estate. Julianne, you little snake! She thrashed against their grip, her polished facade completely disintegrating into an ugly, weeping mess. Her expensive designer heels dragged uselessly against the polished floor as the guards pulled her toward the elevator, her shrill curses echoing down the hallway until the chrome doors slid shut, cutting her off mid-shriek. The boardroom fell into dead, absolute silence. The 12 board members sat frozen, looking at me with a mixture of profound awe and sudden terror. They realized in that single moment that the empire hadn't fallen. It had simply returned to its rightful bloodline. I walked slowly to the head of the long mahogany table, pulling out the massive leather chair where my father had sat for 30 years. I sat down, folded my hands over the cold surface, and looked around the room at the men and women watching me. Now then, I said, my voice echoing with absolute authority through the 52nd floor. Let's talk about restructuring.